Good. Okay, so you have a major in art, or do you? I mean, your your formation is artist, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I
Why?
have.
Why art? Why did you choose to
Why
go
did
for
I
art?
choose
Yeah.
art? Um, well, so trying to think if I actually made a conscious decision to choose it. I think that, I started studying film in school, and I was really interested in photography. But I guess my practice is more driven by the kind of ideas rather than thinking of the photograph or the way that I make images as a document. And so I guess why and where it fit into it, for me, I was thinking just about the importance of storytelling, and that's something that's very important. And I see in many ways my role in that is as somebody that re-narrates or disrupts stories in a way, or even conventions of sort of narrating and storytelling. So in some ways, I guess I think of it as that's my role. And in terms of my work or my broader sense of what my practice is, it's, as a photographer, I investigate that relationship between primarily the body and the lens. I think that's where I can more generally say that that's where my practice is, and that it's more about the ideas. My practice is much more conceptually driven. Yeah. So, one project might look quite different from the other. I look at these and try to understand the kind of notions between what is fiction and what is reality. I think about the space of the photograph as a possibility for a kind of performative or staged space for something to happen.
Exactly. So the time, or better, the place. What would be the place where you think your artwork started? Like, when did you decide, or where was that place where you decided?
Well, I think for me, I think about those early an early interest in the family album, so in the home.
Yeah.
And so I think my practice always seems to go back to those early experiences of family photographs. And again, just observe this sort of observation of the family album, of that had a sort of narrative structure, and then that in turn led to thinking about other broader kind of archives that we have, photographic archives, that these are sort of both public and private images, things that we find in the home, but in archives. And then also a little bit later, looking at sort of found photographs and, thinking about the kinds of meaning and story that they can offer, or those images. So also finding the images that are kind of discarded from the family album or the family archives. So thinking, that it brings this sort of awareness of, that these are very curated, things. They tell a particular kind of story, and that there are sometimes gaps in there. So it made for, further kind of contemplation and kind of wondering about that. And I think that's why this idea of sort of just disrupting that thing and drawing attention to perhaps those kinds of gaps, or also the idea of re-narrating them. So
Yeah.
that also became really interesting.
Yeah, your first artwork. Yes.
First sort of artwork, and it's, but then I was thinking about this one photo, and it's actually a photograph of my mom taking a photo of me. So this is a series, and just to continue what I was saying about how I approached the family album, and I actually found these in my studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that, for me, the sort of tactile, thinking about the photographs that were taken in the home as very tactile objects, and my own, fascination. What I loved is getting the snapshots, these 4x6 snapshots from the pharmacy, from the drugstore, and you would, go through each of them, and that gesture of going from one to the next to find out which were the best snapshots and which were going to make it into the album. Mm-hmm. And so this is when I started to re-photograph some of the photographs that were in the album, mm-hmm. ones that I found of myself, and then I would do a slight variation in the cropping, and so the viewer coming to the gallery was able to pick up these objects and shuffle through them, and a slight shift in crop would show more images, say, to the left of the frame or to the right, and just show a slight movement in the cropping of the stories that are told with it. It's another way of kind of socializing.
Absolutely, it is. Well, an artist, what does is actually to communicate through a language that we don't actually understand as an alphabet. It's much deeper. It's something that goes with beyond numbers and beyond words, and it goes with emotions even, and it could, it's like the knowledge. For the spectator, you will get the knowledge with emotions, like getting the knowledge with all the body. Well, this is, I think it is one of my favorite questions, but if it's not art, then what would it be?
Oh, I don't know. I think I was trying to imagine. I was just, very drawn to it. Perhaps it would be something like a historian, and then I also thought that maybe I would be some kind of biologist, because in university, that was, one of my electives was in biology. And I remembered my professor would come and show, he studied bats. He was known as the bat expert, or the Batman, he liked to call himself. He would show up to class, and part of the class was him showing us all of these photographs that he was taking of bats from all around the world. And so I found that quite, fascinating, the idea of this sort of ongoing observation, and that he used to sometimes bring his bats to the class as well.
We had one lab that was in 2015. We have one lab on migratory birds.
Oh, yeah.
So, like we were looking at them, but we were also connecting with some ideas on human migration. So there was this area in Colombia where migration is really difficult, because people from Africa, from Asia, from Cuba, they wanted to cross those borders to go to the United States. But this is also a place for migration of birds that is really important. Like it came for billions and billions of birds came. And somehow it was when we were talking with all these ornithologists and biologists, we kind of relate a lot with what they are doing in terms of this passion, I would say, like passion for curiosity for life and for context and.
And so looking at, again, photographs of the body, and in this it's myself in it, so posing with in front of the camera over a long period of time. So instead of a contemporary fraction of a second, it's capturing, in a sense, like any photograph really is a trace of the body, and this taken over a long exposure that's moving becomes a kind of trace, but then at the same time it fails to be that sort of exact likeness or a likeness of the body. It's much more of a trace of it. And so thinking about again this idea of the archive of images, and how these thinking about how images that circulate within the kind of private space of the home, how perhaps things change as it moves into a more public space.
Failed portrait.
So yeah, and
what's the idea of failure? Why did you bring that up with the title of
the failure of the portrait? I'm just trying to I'm gonna exit.
And
so
failed portrait. Yeah.
I guess that it fails in a sense of the expectation of it being the kind of exact likeness of it, and again this idea of the image itself. So thinking about even the process of how it's made, where there's a movement in the body, and that these are ones that were considered sort of out, as I said, outtakes perhaps. So that it fails to provide that kind of evidence of what our expectation is of the image.
It's true. I'm gonna pass to see the others.
Yes.
Wow. I love the grain that it has.
Yes. So, we're looking at this idea, previously talking about more kind of vernacular forms of photography, the idea of those that found in the home, and then thinking about how the meaning of these can shift when they're circulated in a more public context, a museum, the institutional archives, news media. So thinking about this idea, the shift in meaning that happens. So since the beginning of that photographic portraiture, the portrait has been used to both kind of honor or vilify. It can vilify the sort of human subject, the person within it. And I'm really interested in those kinds of shifts that can take place, and how that affects our perception of it. They're made so that you're referring to the kind of graininess of them, and I'm using a process of which is the 19th century process called wet collodion. And so the image is produced with a wet collodion process, and so that has it's kind of a liquidy a process, and the light sensitive emulsion, it has to be exposed and processed while it's still wet and in a very short period of time. So it's often described as this kind of the Polaroid of the 19th century. You get to see it right away. But what can happen is that there can have this liquid residue, these kinds of markings that remain.
Yes.
Which that would have been perhaps for a commercial portrait studio. They may have thought of that as like, oh, it was a mistake, because you're not supposed to show that. It's really supposed to be much more transparent. You're not supposed to see all that kind of liquidy stuff. And so, but this can remain in it, and it draws us back to the surface of the image and the materiality of the image. Yeah. And that's something that is often kept invisible. You know, we just look through what it is. We don't think of it as an object. We don't think about it as a single moment and fleeting moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about the surface of that liquidy thing that is an actual physical thing. So in drawing it back to the surface, perhaps it draws to those invisible things about what a photograph is and the power that it has sometimes, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of chemistry.
Yeah.
A lot of chemistry on that. And what is it fixed on? Is it paper or is it glass?
It is this one, so it's a contemporary one, so it's aluminum.
Oh.
And so it would have been tin, so these would have been like tin types, but what Clodium was also on glass plates as well. But the contemporary ones are on aluminum. And then I use the aluminum. I actually scan the aluminum to make the prints. And I have some of the prints here. And then the prints. So here's an example of the print itself. And so then these form, as I say, a kind of, you know, they're displayed in a sense of a kind of fictional archive of images. And it's me, I don't know if I said that, it's me in all of the images.
Yeah.
So I pose myself in it.
You are also a teacher, so
yes.
Would you tell us a little bit on that? And as we at the beginning we started talking about how it is teaching, in this virtuality.
I mean, you know, that's an important part. So I'm a practicing artist, but also an educator. And those are, you know, just really important aspects. And I think that I'm a constant learner as well in this. And so, you know, it's a real privilege to teach it, but I hope to, you know, get the students to really, you know, question these things in their own work, to find a way to communicate with the camera, to tell their own stories or do their own investigations. And so, you know, a lot of the work that we do beyond the technical thing is to explore, you know, ideas. One of the projects that I like to get them to do is to explore ideas of home. Like, what does home mean to you? And that means different things to different people, or whether they think about it in terms of a specific building, you know, is it about, you know, a kind of sense of nationality, is about a certain group of people, you know, all of these things that are really part of a kind of who we are as people, but also these kinds of emotional things. And sometimes that's a safe place and sometimes it's not. I mean, it's quite complex. So knowing that my own practice is something that really, I always go back to my experience in the photography in the home, you know, trying to get students to think about that as well in their own lives. And then just trying to mentor them to develop their own ideas and discussion. It's really wonderful just to have discussions about these things and their thoughts and ideas about things like Instagram, you know, and or what's really wonderful as well is to give them a film camera and get them to develop a roll of film. And for many, that's really outside of their experience. And so, you know, to say, okay, we're going to go into a dark room and create an image and do something really sort of physical, hands-on. And so it's really exciting to see them sort of slow down that process, but also, again, think about the sort of materiality of photography, because so much of it is just these things that we see on screens, and that it's a way of sort of slowing down and really thinking about what these objects means and how they mean. Like, how do they mean? What do they signify? You know, and how your own life experience, you bring that to it. I mean, good or bad, or how we read these things, but it's important to sort of have these exchanges.
And how can they do this these days? I mean,
oh yeah.
Do they have access to the dark room anymore, or?
Since we are doing all of the, at least where I am in my program, everything online, and we do this style of kind of video conferencing. So the one thing that I have had them do, so they are allowed to, if they want, work in film, but they would, scan the images and present them if they're using a film camera. Most are working with digital cameras or DSLRs or mirrorless, or just even an iPhone or a cell phone camera is fine to work with. But others, I show them how to work with cyanotypes, and cyanotypes are really easy to work with. They can just buy like pre-coded cyanotypes and expose, and so they could use this for their project. And this you can just buy, they can purchase it online, and they don't really need anything but just water and
light.
and light. And so also you can work in fabric. So this is one way for those that want to experiment with cameraless images or alternative processes. And that's something that in my own practice I really enjoy. It allows me to sort of really experiment, and so again, just a new way for them to think about making a photograph of the image, the power of the photographer, and communicating that. So thinking about interpretation. So we do our critiques of their work, but also looking at some key images that have been taken, and breaking it down, like what does this mean? So looking at an advertisement, how does this function? How does it actually sell you things? Or looking at an image of the migrant mother and what that represents, and an artist, so that we spend a lot of time just looking at images and trying to understand like what's happening in there and how is it communicating, what was the historical context. So all of these things, and that those things can be emphasized as well when we're not in our lab making work. We can also spend more time like just looking at images and discussing them as well. I think there's more opportunity for that and sharing ideas.
Yeah, but as you said, like we cannot complain. We're at home. I mean, it's kind of nice, but what it gets really hard is all this. I mean, in order to understand things, we have to connect with other people, and it's not easy to get closer connections with others. And the best things of university or college is the mates, the other people.
Yeah. True. And I just keep promising them, I tell them, like, if you were in the lab today, we'd be, you would hang up your work, and we would just spend time walking around and looking at it. And then we would drink coffee and talk about it. Or people arrive early with their lunch. They sit around. I put all of my books out. I have a lot of photo books. And so I put them out, and they just sit there and chat amongst themselves and look at these books that I've brought out. And all of those kinds of exchanges, the late night, working the last minute, getting their work done, needing help with something. And I think those are the things that are lost. And I keep promising them that, when we get back in there, boy, we'll definitely try to make up for lost time.
Yeah, it would happen. Sure. So, Jennifer, it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.